They told a 17-year-old black boy to go eat in the kitchen. Not the dining room, not the table his father had reserved weeks in advance. The kitchen. A plastic chair wedged between cardboard boxes and trash bins in the back of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, while white guests sat at candlelit tables drinking wine they couldn't pronounce. No explanation, no apology, just a smile so practiced it had stopped meaning anything a long time ago. Jordan sat down, because he had learned, somewhere along the way, that his presence would always need to justify itself, that rooms like that one were not built for him, and that the most dangerous thing he could do was make someone uncomfortable by pointing that out. What no one in that kitchen knew, what no one in that gleaming, ivory-walled dining room could have imagined, was who was about to walk through the front door. A Korean Mafia boss, tailored black suit, a Patek Philippe watch catching the candlelight, tattoos running up his neck like a signature that needed no introduction. A man who had never once in his life been told to wait somewhere smaller. A man whose son was sitting on a plastic chair next to the garbage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply looked at the owner of that 3 Michelin star restaurant and said 4 words that would bring that man to his knees. Literally. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There are places in this world that were not built for everyone, and the people inside them know it, even if they would never say so out loud. The Ivory Fork had been standing on the corner of Whitmore and 5th for 31 years. 3 Michelin stars, a wait list that stretched for weeks, walls the color of aged ivory, candlelight that never flickered, and a kind of silence between the tables that felt less like peace and more like an agreement. A collective, unspoken understanding that certain things were simply done here, and certain other things simply were not. Raymond Cole had built it that way on purpose. He had inherited money, but not respect, and for 31 years he had used one to manufacture the other. He knew the name of every sommelier he had ever fired. He remembered the exact evening a food critic from the Times had described his sea bass as transcendent, and he had kept the review framed behind a cabinet in his office, not on the wall where guests could see it. That would have been gauche, but close enough that he could read it whenever he needed to remember who he was. What Raymond Cole did not know on that particular Friday evening was that the night had already decided something about him. He just hadn't been informed yet. Jordan Kang walked through the front door at 7:43. He was 17 years old, and he walked like someone who had learned very early that his presence would always arrive before his introduction, that people would have already formed a shape of him in their minds before he opened his mouth, and that the shape they formed would have very little to do with him. He had learned to carry this quietly, to wear it the way he wore his bomber jacket, like something he had chosen, even if the choice had been made for him. The hostess looked up. There is a specific kind of pause that happens in rooms like that one. Not a long pause, not even a pause that most people would notice. Just a half-second interruption in the automatic hospitality that places like the Ivory Fork trained their staff to perform at all times. A reset, a recalculation. The moment between what someone sees and what they decide to do with it. The hostess performed that pause. She asked Jordan to wait. She said it pleasantly. She said it with the particular warmth that well-trained service staff deploy when they need to communicate a boundary without naming it. Jordan waited. He was used to waiting. The assessor who had accompanied him, a quiet man in a gray suit who worked for Jordan's father, stepped slightly to the side, as people tend to do when they sense that a situation is about to resolve itself in a way that doesn't include them. Victor Hale appeared from the corridor near the kitchen. He was the kind of man who moved through rooms with professional efficiency, who processed situations in terms of what they required of him and nothing more. He looked at Jordan. He looked at the hostess. Something passed between them that had no words because it didn't need any. He told Jordan that his table was almost ready. He told him there was a comfortable place to wait, just through the back. He said the word comfortable the way people say words they have chosen very carefully. The way you say, just a moment, when you mean much longer than that. Jordan followed him through the corridor, through the double doors, into the heat and noise of the kitchen. A plastic chair had been placed near the far wall, beside a stack of flattened cardboard boxes and a row of trash receptacles that smelled of citrus rind and something faintly sour beneath it. The kitchen moved around Jordan as if he were a piece of furniture. No one explained anything. No one needed to. Jordan sat down. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the white tile wall in front of him. He did not take out his phone. He simply sat, very still, in the way that people sit when they have decided that the best available response to something is to make themselves very small and wait for it to be over. Diane Whitfield saw him the moment he came through the door. She knew the jacket. She recognized the cordão, the thin gold chain that caught the kitchen light once, briefly, before Jordan leaned forward and it disappeared beneath his collar. She stood at her station with a spoon in one hand and said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing. She had been practicing it for 12 years. What she did not know, and what Jordan did not know, and what not a single person in that kitchen could have predicted, was that 7 minutes later, a man in a black suit was going to walk through the front door of the Ivory Fork, and that by the time that man left, everything in the room would be arranged differently. Not loudly, not violently, just differently. The way things rearrange themselves when someone who has never been questioned walks into a space built entirely on the assumption that he never would. Kang Tae-won did not make entrances. This was something people noticed only after the fact, after he had already crossed a room, already settled into whatever space he had decided to occupy, already made the quiet determination that the room now belonged to him in some functional sense, even if no deed or title would ever say so. He did not announce himself. He did not need the room to turn. The room turned anyway, the way a compass needle turns, not because anyone commands it to, but because the pull is simply there. Raymond Cole was at the host stand when Kang walked through the door, reviewing the evening's reservations with the kind of performative attention that restaurant owners deploy when they want to appear busy without being inaccessible. He looked up. He processed the tuxedo black of Kang's suit, the watch, the stillness of the man's face, the faint, unmistakable geometry of the tattoo visible above the collar, shapes that Cole could not have named but understood, instinctively, the way animals understand weather. He smiled. He extended his hand. He said it was an honor. Kang shook the hand once. He said he had a reservation. He said his son should already be here. Ray Cole had not lived 68 years and built a 3-star restaurant by being a man who panicked. He was a man of managed surfaces. He nodded. He turned. He made a gesture to the floor manager with the particular economy of movement that meant, "Find the boy, now, quietly, bring him here, and do not make anything of it." Victor Hale received the gesture. He understood it completely. He went to the kitchen. The kitchen, when Victor pushed through the double doors, was mid-service and loud. The controlled chaos of heat and timing and people who have learned to move around each other without collision. He crossed the floor toward the far wall, toward the plastic chair, toward Jordan, who had not moved, who was still sitting with his hands on his knees, still looking at the tile, though by now his jaw had set in a way that it hadn't when he first sat down. Victor said the table was ready. He said it efficiently. He said it the way you tell someone something that is technically true in order to avoid saying the thing that is actually true. Jordan stood. He didn't say anything. He followed Victor back through the double doors, through the corridor, out into the warm amber light of the dining room. And that was when he saw his father standing at the entrance to the main hall, already watching him. Kang Chae-won watched his son walk out of the kitchen corridor. He watched the way Jordan moved, that particular careful stillness that he had learned to carry in his shoulders, that composure that looked like confidence from a distance and looked like something else entirely up close. Kang had seen that walk before. He had seen it in boardrooms and in back rooms, and in the faces of men who had been told in 1,000 quiet ways that they were allowed to be present, but not to take up space. He had never expected to see it in his son. Something shifted in Kang's face. Not dramatically. Not in a way that Raymond Cole, standing nearby, would have been able to fully read or name. It was a very small shift, the kind that happens in a face when a decision has been made, when the internal calculation is complete, and what remains is simply the execution. He extended his hand to Jordan. Jordan took it. They walked to the table together. The candle on table 8 was lit. The wine had been opened. 2 menus waited in precise parallel. Everything was exactly as it should have been 40 minutes earlier. They sat. Diane Whitfield appeared to take their order. She had insisted on the table herself, had told the floor manager without explanation that she would handle it, in a tone that did not invite discussion. She stood beside the table with her order pad, her expression professional and careful, her eyes moving once to Jordan and then away. Kang ordered without looking at the menu. He had not looked at it because he had not come for the food. He asked for the duck. He asked for the risotto. And then he set the menu down on the table with a quiet, flat precision and looked up at Raymond Cole, who had materialized at a respectful distance, close enough to be attentive, far enough to seem like he wasn't hovering, and said something that Cole would spend a long time thinking about afterward. He said, "My son will need an apology before his meal." Cole's smile did not falter. He was too good for that, but something behind it did. Some quiet internal scaffolding that his expression had been resting on. He said, "Of course." He said he would see to it personally. He said, personally, with the practiced ease of a man who has been managing situations for decades. Kang looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. Then he said, "Good. And you will serve him yourself. The risotto. You, not your staff." Cole said nothing for 3 full seconds, which in a restaurant of that caliber was an eternity. Then he said, "Of course." He walked away. Diane watched him go. She watched the back of his neck, the particular set of his shoulders, the way a man walks when he is trying very hard not to let anyone see that something has just happened to him. She had watched Raymond Cole walk in and out of rooms for 12 years, and she had never seen him walk quite like that before. She looked back at the table, at Jordan, who was sitting very straight now, with his hands in his lap, watching the candle. She had the sudden, vivid sense that she was standing at the edge of something that had been building for a long time, in this room, in this city, in the specific and invisible architecture of who gets seated where and who gets sent somewhere else. and that tonight, for reasons she could not entirely explain, it was not going to resolve the way it always had. She went back to the kitchen. She stood at her station. She picked up her spoon. She put it back down. She waited. Raymond Cole stood in the corridor between the dining room and the kitchen and breathed. This was something he had never needed to do before. To stop in a corridor and simply breathe. To hold still in the in-between space of his own restaurant like a man who had momentarily forgotten which direction he was supposed to be walking. He was 68 years old. He had navigated city inspectors and difficult critics, and the slow financial deterioration that no one outside his accountant's office knew about. He had managed things. He had always managed things. But there was something in the way Kang Tae-won had looked at him. Not with anger, not with threat, not with any of the expressions that Cole had trained himself over a lifetime to recognize and neutralize, but with a kind of absolute, patient certainty. The certainty of a man who already knows how something ends, and is simply waiting for the other person to arrive at the same conclusion. Cole had met powerful men before. He had dined with senators. He had refused reservations to celebrities. Power was something he understood, or believed he understood, as a thing that expressed itself through volume, through insistence, through the performance of importance. What Kang had was different. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of power that doesn't need to perform because it has never once, in its entire existence, been required to prove itself to anyone. Cole straightened his jacket. He was going to manage this. He walked into the kitchen. The kitchen received him the way it always did, with the organized indifference of people who are too busy to acknowledge hierarchy except when they have to. Victor looked up from his station. Diane did not look up at all, which was its own kind of statement. Cole moved to the pass, where the risotto had already been plated. White ceramic, shallow bowl, truffle shaved thin across the surface, a small pool of butter that had gone still and perfect at the center. He picked it up. He felt the weight of it, the warmth of it through the ceramic. He stood there for a moment, holding a plate in his own restaurant, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that he was not entirely sure what he was. He walked back through the corridor, back into the dining room, across the floor, and he was aware, in the specific and terrible way of people who suddenly become conscious of being watched, that he was being watched, though no one was visibly watching him. The room continued its low murmur of conversation, its gentle clink of crystal, its warm and well-managed normalcy. No one at any other table knew that anything was happening. He reached table 8. Kang was looking at him. Jordan was looking at the candle, or pretending to. His eyes were angled down, but his whole body had the tension of someone who is very carefully not looking at something they are intensely aware of. Cole stood at the side of the table. He held the plate. He looked at Kang, and Kang said nothing, made no gesture, gave no instruction, simply looked back at him with that same expression of patient, absolute certainty. And Raymond Cole understood that no one was going to make this easier for him. He bent his knees. It was not graceful. He was 68 years old, and his knees were not what they had been, and the floor of the dining room was hardwood, and the act of kneeling, the physical, literal act of a man of his age and his standing, lowering himself to the ground in his own establishment, cost him something that he was not sure had a name. He placed the plate on the table from that position, from his knees, at the height of a boy of 17 who had sat on a plastic chair in a kitchen and looked at white tile and decided that the best available response was to make himself very small. Jordan looked at the plate. Then he looked at Raymond Cole, still kneeling, still holding the rim of the ceramic bowl with both hands. There was nothing triumphant in Jordan's face, nothing vindicated or electric or satisfied. There was something much quieter than that, something that looked, if you watched it carefully enough, like a person slowly recognizing that they are allowed to be exactly where they are. He said, quietly, almost to himself, "Thank you." Cole stood. His knees ached. He straightened his jacket again, the same gesture he had made in the corridor, the reflex of a man reassembling his surfaces. He nodded once. He walked away. Diane had come to the edge of the kitchen doorway. She had told herself she was checking on the pass. She had told herself she needed to see whether the duck was ready. She was doing neither of those things. She was standing at the threshold between the kitchen and the dining room, between the place where Jordan had been sent and the place where Jordan was now sitting. And she was watching. She watched Cole walk away from the table. She watched the particular way he moved now, different from before. Smaller somehow, despite his height, despite his jacket, despite the 31 years of accumulated authority that this building represented. She watched him disappear toward his office at the back of the room. She looked at Jordan. Jordan had picked up his fork. He was looking at the risotto. His father had not said a word through any of it, had not spoken during the kneeling, had not offered commentary, had not looked at Cole at all after the moment he stood. He was looking at Jordan with the expression of a man watching something he had been waiting a long time to see. Not a scene, not a victory, not a lesson delivered. Something simpler than all of that. Something that did not require a word. Diane went back to her station. She picked up her spoon. She looked at the wall for a moment. Then she started cooking again. Because the kitchen does not stop. Because service continues. Because the world outside the double doors keeps moving whether or not something significant has just shifted inside it. But something had shifted. She could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. Not the storm itself, not yet, but the particular quality of the air in the moments just before, when the atmosphere has already decided what it's going to do and is simply in the process of becoming it. The evening continued. The candles burned. The crystal clinked. Raymond Cole did not come back out of his office for the rest of the service. The envelope was cream-colored and unsealed. Kang Chae-won had prepared it 3 days earlier, in the study of his home, at the desk where he signed documents that moved money across borders and settled debts that courts would never see. He had written 4 sentences on a single sheet of paper, folded it twice, and placed it inside without sealing it. Because a sealed envelope implies that the contents are final, and what he had written was not a finality. It was a diagnosis. There is a difference. He handed it to his assessor on the way out of the Ivory Fork at 9:41 without a word, and the assessor knew, without being told, that it was for Cole, and that Cole would find it before the night was over. Jordan did not see the envelope. Jordan was walking beside his father through the front door, through the same door he had entered 2 hours earlier, with the particular, careful stillness he had learned to carry in his shoulders. And he was walking differently now, not loudly, not with performance, just differently in the way that a person walks when something internal has rearranged itself, when the weight they have been carrying has not disappeared, but has shifted, redistributed, settled into a position that is somehow more bearable than it was before. The night air outside was cool. The street was quiet in the way that wealthy streets are quiet at night. Not empty, but subdued. The city's noise absorbed by the width of the sidewalks and the height of the buildings. and the general agreement of the neighborhood that loudness was something that happened somewhere else. They stood for a moment on the sidewalk, father and son, the man in the black suit and the boy in the bomber jacket with the gold chain that caught the light from the restaurant window once, briefly, before they stepped further into the dark. Jordan said, "You didn't have to do that." Kong looked at the street. He was quiet for a moment, in the particular way that he was always quiet. Not the quiet of someone searching for words, but the quiet of someone deciding how many of the words they have already found are worth giving away. He said, "I know." Jordan looked at him. "Then why?" And Kang Tae-won, who had not raised his voice in 11 years, who had built an empire on the discipline of saying less than he knew, who had carried a grief for a decade that he had never named out loud to anyone, not to his associates, not to his attorney, not to the priest he had stopped visiting 3 years after the accident, turned and looked at his son with an expression that Jordan had never seen on his face before. It was not soft exactly. It was not the warmth of a man who has decided to perform tenderness. It was something rawer than that, and quieter than that, and more permanent than that. It was the expression of a man who has been waiting for the right moment to tell the truth, and has just realized that there will never be a right moment, and that this one is therefore as good as any. He said, "Because you are my son. And I was not there when they sent you to that kitchen. And I will not let that be the thing you remember about tonight." Jordan said nothing. He looked at the pavement. His jaw moved once, slightly, in the way that jaws move when something is being held rather than released. Then he nodded. Once. The way his father nodded, with that same economy, that same compressed acknowledgement that contained more than it expressed. They got into the car. Inside the ivory fork, Raymond Cole opened the envelope at his desk at 10:15, after the last table had been cleared and the kitchen had gone quiet and the staff had filtered out into the night. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. He read the 4 sentences. He read them again. The letter did not threaten him. It did not reference the kneeling or the kitchen or the plastic chair. It made no mention of Jordan at all. It said only this, that Kong had considered the investment, that he had decided against it, that he wished the establishment well, and that he hoped Mr. Cole would take the time, in the coming months, to examine the criteria by which he determined the value of the people who entered his door. That was all. Cole sat with the letter for a long time. The office was very quiet. The framed Times Review was in the cabinet behind him. He could not see it, but he knew exactly where it was, had always known exactly where it was, had oriented himself toward it for 31 years, the way a compass orients itself toward something that it cannot help but point at. He thought about Jordan walking out of the kitchen corridor. He thought about the plastic chair. He thought about the half-second pause his hostess had performed, that particular practiced recalculation, and he understood, sitting alone in his quiet office with a letter in his hands, that he had known about that pause, that he had always known about it, that he had built the conditions for it to exist, and had called those conditions standards, had called them atmosphere, had called them the particular character of a place that knew what it was. He had never called them what they were. The ivory fork closed 4 months later. The official reason was financial, and this was true, technically, the way many official reasons are technically true while leaving the most important parts unspoken. The investors Cole had been counting on did not materialize. The ones he had approached after Kang declined had their own reasons for hesitating. Reasons that had nothing to do with the boy in the bomber jacket. Reasons that were simply the ordinary machinery of risk and return. But Cole sat in the closing meeting with his accountant and his attorney and felt, with the irrational but absolute conviction of a man who has been keeping an honest ledger in some private part of himself, that the two things were not unrelated, that there are costs that don't appear on balance sheets until very late, that there are moments, small, quiet, almost invisible moments, the kind that happen in corridors and kitchens and half-second pauses, that compound in the dark, the way debt compounds, the way erosion compounds, the way all the things we choose not to name accumulate until the structure they were undermining is no longer able to hold its own weight. Diane Whitfield opened her restaurant 8 weeks after the closing. She had negotiated her severance with the precision of someone who had been watching the numbers for years and had simply been waiting for the moment when that knowledge became leverage. The restaurant was on the east side, smaller than the Ivory Fork, with wood tables and no tablecloths, and a menu that changed every week because Diane believed that a kitchen should remain in motion. She called it Cadera Oito. She had not told anyone why. The morning after it opened, a reservation came in for a table of 2. The name on the reservation was Kang. The time was 7:43. Diane looked at it for a long time. Then she confirmed it. She did not assign them a corner table or a table near the kitchen. She gave them the best seat in the house, window, garden view, candlelight that did not flicker, and she set it herself, by hand, the way she set things when she wanted them to be right. Jordan walked through the door that evening, wearing the same bomber jacket, the same gold chain catching the light. He was 18 now. He walked like someone who had decided, sometime in the past year, to stop making himself small. He sat down at the table. He looked at the room. He looked at the candle. He picked up the menu. And for the first time in a very long time, longer than he could have precisely said, longer than he would have wanted to admit, he felt, without qualification or condition or the low, persistent hum of waiting to be told otherwise, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Jordan didn't need to shout. His father didn't need to make a scene. Dignity spoke for itself, quiet, firm, and impossible to ignore. And I want to ask you something. Has there ever been a moment in your life when you were sent to the kitchen? Not literally, but in a relationship, in a dynamic, with a man who made you doubt what you clearly felt, who made you feel small, and you did. Not out of weakness, but because he learned, at some point, that the cost of speaking up was higher than the cost of enduring. If you recognize this story was made for you. And there's something that was created especially for women who have come this far and decided they're not going to sit in anyone's plastic chair anymore. It's called The Woman He Can't Manipulate, 30-Day Reset. A guided 30-day challenge for you to learn to recognize manipulation early, stop abandoning yourself, and rebuild a dignity that no one else will be able to negotiate with you. It's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming hard to confuse. The link is in the pinned comment below. Just click. And if you're on your phone right now, we're showing the QR code on the screen. Just point your camera. You've waited too long. This reset starts now. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room and felt, before a single word was spoken, that someone had already decided you didn't belong there? Have you ever stayed silent in a moment of humiliation, not because you were weak, but because you had learned that the cost of speaking was higher than the cost of enduring? And if someone had stood up for you in that moment, if someone had looked at the room that tried to diminish you and quietly, without raising their voice, rearranged it, how would that have changed the way you saw yourself? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and belonging, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel